Thank you so much for taking the time out to be here today. As a first question, I want to ask you, what inspired you to give to charity, to do philanthropy? What first inspired you?
Well, I'm a son of poor Greek immigrants. Came over here at the age of 17, not a word of English, a few pennies in their pocket. And they worked and saved so their two sons could get the best education money could buy. And I'm a very lucky American dreamer. And I've decided that on our current path, the American dream may fade because of unsustainable debts and promises that we have made that we just can't afford. So I'm devoting my money to that purpose at the present time.
So if you could give all your money away, where would you give it? Where would you put your money if you could give it all away?
Well, we're going to have to persuade the American people that they're on a very destructive and unsustainable path, and they've got to make some tough decisions. We've got to give up certain programs. We've got to cut certain programs back. We're going to have to pay more taxes.
So fiscal responsibility.
Fiscal responsibility. And if we don't do that, we're likely to have a major crisis, and we've seen what's happened in Europe. We're likely to have a slow growth crisis because all of our money and interest payments will go into funding the debt instead of investing on our future.
So what's the solution? How do we fix that?
Well, first we got to make the public aware of the problem, and we've spent a lot of time and money on that. We and others are making a great deal of progress. Second, we've got to lay out what the solutions are. The solutions involve essentially cutting the entitlement programs, Social Security and Medicare, protecting the poor, and then put everything on the table, defense and so forth. We're going to have to pay more taxes, and rich people like me in particular are going to have to sacrifice fully and fairly. We have to protect the very poor. But it's a period of shared sacrifice we're going to have to go through.
What made you decide to kind of support the Giving Pledge?
Well, I'm brought up in a small town in Nebraska. I've known Warren Rudman for longer than I can remember, and I've been a huge admirer. And he called me, and I do almost anything Warren asks me to do. So I said yes right on the phone. I was planning to do it anyway, so it was
Is there a philanthropist in history or currently that you really admire in terms of, a great philanthropist?
Well, I greatly admire the Rockefeller family, and I'm lucky enough to have known them as personal friends, and they're remarkably humble and generous with their resources, and they're devoting their lives now to bettering society. So they're a marvelous role model. I've gotten to know Bill Gates, and he's an extraordinary human being, and his knowledge of various subjects of philanthropy is just extraordinary. So I've got some great role models.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned in philanthropy? Are there any big lessons that you've learned about giving?
I've learned that you ought to, as someone once said, follow your bliss. Do something you're passionate about, because it's not just the financial capital you put into these projects. It's the human capital, the excitement and the energy that multiplies the effectiveness of what you're doing. You ought to put your money where other people haven't already taken care of the problem. You ought to identify areas that need to be handled. So I've learned that. You've got to be able to tolerate failure, because you're doing things no one has done before, in our case, and you're going to fail. But you can't have high rewards and no risks in life. So you've got to be willing to tolerate take a long time, make some mistakes, and not be worried about making mistakes. Because if you didn't make mistakes, you wouldn't be doing something interesting or rewarding.
Are there any inspirational stories of giving or philanthropy that you would want to share with the Forbes audience, something that really kind of touched your heart?
I think what the Rockefeller family did, 100 years ago maybe, was to take the rest of the world and see that people were starving, and seeing that they didn't have the know-how to do anything about it, and taking the American agricultural techniques and implanting them, if I can use that phrase, in the poor of the world. And they saved hundreds of millions of lives. And I always thought that was a very inspiring story.